Have you ever realized how life can be built or destroyed by the choices we make daily? That is exactly what Proverbs 14 reveals. A brutal contrast between wisdom that builds and foolishness that ruins. We are not talking about abstract theories, but about practical truths that define the course of your family, your work, and even your spirituality. It is a text that exposes the secrets of stability and shows why so many fall even when they seem to stand firm. Right from the beginning, the chapter presents us with powerful images, houses being raised and houses falling, paths that seem safe but lead to death, laughter that hides pain, and entire nations being lifted or shamed. These contrasts are not there by chance. It is as if the author were placing us before a mirror saying, "Look carefully, you are already on one of these sides." Proverbs 14 is a map of choices. Each verse functions as a crossroads where the human heart must decide whether to follow the way of prudence or of foolishness. In each line, we are confronted with the personal responsibility of understanding that wisdom is not just a beautiful idea, but a practice that determines destinies. Whoever builds with it flourishes. Whoever despises it collapses. The impact of this chapter lies precisely in showing that what appears solid may not be. A luxurious house can collapse, while a humble tent can flourish. A laugh may hide tears, and a joy may turn into sorrow. What sustains life is not external appearances, but invisible principles of justice, integrity, and the fear of the Lord. More than contrasts, Proverbs 14 is an invitation to vigilance. It warns us against the illusions of easy paths, the weight of lies, the pursuit of fleeting pleasures. At the same time, it calls us to embrace the power of words, the strength of integrity, the value of discernment, and the beauty of living in the fear of the Lord. It is a chapter that shakes superficial certainties and opens our eyes to spiritual reality. This text is like a school of practical wisdom. It speaks of family, of relationships, of nations, of the human heart. It shows that life is made of seeds. Some generate abundance and others produce ruin. What differentiates destinies is not luck, but the constant choice between building with wisdom or destroying with foolishness. Finally, Proverbs 14 is not merely ancient advice, but a key for our present days. It shows us that true security is not found in human strength, but in the fear of the Lord. It reveals that justice is the foundation that sustains nations, and prudence is the virtue that attracts God's favor. This chapter is an urgent call. Open your eyes, weigh your choices, and build the future on foundations that cannot be shaken. Before we continue, if you enjoy our videos and feel that they have blessed your life, like and comment, even if it's just an amen. This makes a huge difference for this content to reach more people and impact lives. If you are not yet subscribed, take this opportunity to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share with your loved ones. This way, YouTube will get to know you better and recommend even more videos like this to help you on your faith journey. Help spread this message of faith and hope. Each like, comment, and share strengthens this work, which we do with all our heart to build up your life. Together we can reach even more hearts. Continuing, the first image that Proverbs 14 presents to us is powerful. The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish one tears it down with her own hands. This is not merely a metaphor about the home, but a universal principle. Wisdom is a constructive force, an energy that organizes, protects, and generates growth. Foolishness, on the other hand, is self-destructive, a silent poison that undermines solid structures. Every choice we make becomes either a brick or a hammer. Notice how this contrast shows that the destiny of a family, a project, or even a nation does not depend solely on external resources, but on the inner posture of the one who leads. A wise woman here represents anyone who assumes the responsibility of building. Her actions can be seeds of life or of chaos. This premise reveals that wisdom is daily action, not merely accumulated knowledge. When the text speaks of building, it brings the idea of planning, discipline, and patience. Building takes time, requires repetition and consistency. In contrast, tearing down can be quick, the result of one thoughtless act or ongoing negligence. Wisdom builds slowly. Foolishness destroys in seconds. This is the great lesson. What takes years to be built can be lost in a single careless moment. The wise woman is someone who acts strategically, who does not make decisions driven solely by emotions, but considers the consequences. She understands that every word spoken and every action taken shapes the atmosphere of the home. On the other hand, the foolish woman lives by impulses, does not measure consequences, and in seeking immediate gratification, compromises the future. This principle applies to relationships, businesses, and ministries alike. Wisdom has a silent power. It does not need to shout to show results. Whoever observes a life founded on wisdom sees fruits of peace, stability, and growth. Foolishness, however, may seem fun at first, but soon reveals its trail of destruction, divided homes, wounded hearts, wasted resources. That is why the Bible invites us to choose daily the path of wisdom. This proverb also exposes a practical truth. No one ruins their own life all at once. Foolishness begins with small cracks, an accepted lie, unchecked anger, repeated negligence. Each poorly laid brick becomes a structural weakness. Little by little, what should have been a firm house collapses. Wisdom, on the contrary, closes gaps, strengthens pillars, and shields the construction against storms. Finally, this text provokes us to reflect. Are we building or destroying? Are our words mortar that unites or a hammer that separates? Every day, as we interact with family, colleagues, and community, we are building a legacy. Wisdom is a long-term project, and its reward is lasting. Foolishness promises shortcuts but delivers ruins. The choice is before us, to be builders of life or agents of destruction. Integrity is described as an invisible shield that protects the righteous. Whoever walks in uprightness walks securely, but whoever turns aside multiplies deception. This biblical truth reveals that life is not only about external achievements, but about inner coherence. The upright need not fear being exposed, because their strength lies in living according to truth. The dishonest, on the other hand, lives in constant flight from themselves. Living in integrity means aligning thoughts, words, and actions. It is not only about appearing correct before others, but about being whole before God. An upright person does not trade values for temporary conveniences. They understand that character is not built in public, but in the backstage, when no one is watching. And it is this hidden firmness that makes them unshakable in times of crisis. The biblical text also shows us that the absence of integrity creates a web of deception. Whoever lies must sustain new lies. Whoever deceives must cover traps, and whoever betrays becomes a slave of their own falsehood. It is like trying to walk on quicksand. The more one struggles, the deeper they sink. The path of uprightness, no matter how narrow it seems, always leads to safety. Integrity does not mean perfection, but coherence. An upright person may fail, but does not hide their failure. They acknowledge, correct, and move forward, and precisely because of that, they inspire trust. Those who live by appearances try to maintain a mask that sooner or later falls. When that happens, the fall is always more painful than if they had walked in truth from the beginning. This premise also shows that integrity is transmissible. Children, disciples, and colleagues learn much more from truth lived than from speeches. A father who promises and fulfills teaches trust. A leader who speaks and acts with justice inspires respect. A friend who remains loyal in difficult times proves the value of uprightness. Integrity creates deep roots that sustain generations. The opposite of this is the corruption of the heart. Those who turn away from uprightness may even achieve immediate advantages, but in the long run, they live surrounded by distrust. They lose credibility, destroy relationships, and most seriously distance themselves from the presence of God. The Bible is clear. There is no real safety outside of integrity. Every gain without truth becomes disguised loss. Finally, this lesson calls us to a practical decision, to choose daily to walk in uprightness. It means giving up dishonest shortcuts, resisting the temptations of deceit, and valuing truth even when it is costly. Because integrity may feel heavy in the present, but in the future it will be a legacy of honor. Dishonesty may feel light at first, but sooner or later it demands an unbearable price. Words carry a power that goes far beyond the sound they produce. In Proverbs 14, we read that the mouth of the fool brings ruin, but the lips of the wise preserve them. This reveals that the tongue can be a deadly weapon or a shield of protection. How many homes have been destroyed not by swords but by harsh words? And how many wounds have been healed simply by a word of comfort? This is the invisible power that shapes destinies. When someone speaks without wisdom, they open doors to their own downfall. Thoughtless words can compromise reputations, alliances, and even futures. The fool does not weigh the impact of what they say and ends up trapped in their own declarations. The wise, however, understand that every word is a seed. Some produce sweet fruit, others thorns. That is why they sow carefully, knowing that one day they will reap what they planted. Words do not disappear into the air. They echo in the mind, mark hearts, and can remain for decades. An unjust criticism can destroy someone's self-esteem for years. A sincere compliment can awaken courage in someone on the verge of giving up. This reality shows that speaking is always an act of responsibility. The tongue is like fire. It can warm on cold nights or set an entire forest ablaze. Biblical wisdom teaches us that guarding our lips does not mean being silent always, but speaking at the right time, in the right way. Silence can be a form of protection, but a well-placed word is a tool of transformation. The wise know when to be quiet, when to exhort, when to encourage. They do not waste words because they know each one has the power to build or destroy. This premise also reminds us that the mouth reveals the heart. What we say reflects what we feed inside us. Hearts full of bitterness overflow in toxic words. Hearts full of hope produce words that inspire. That is why guarding the mouth is, above all, guarding the mind and the heart, aligning them with wisdom and truth. In today's world, where opinions are thrown out every second on social media, this lesson becomes even more urgent. A poorly chosen word can go viral and generate irreparable consequences. In the same way, a message of encouragement can reach thousands and transform entire environments. The principle remains: the power of life and death is in the tongue. The great question this premise leaves us with is, what have you been releasing with your mouth? Are your words bridges or walls? Are they balm or poison? If the fool's mouth leads them to ruin, it is because they themselves dig their own grave with their tongue. But the wise find protection in their words because they use their mouth not as a weapon, but as a tool of life. The future of many depends on what we say today. Proverbs 14 declares, "Where there are no oxen, the crib is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of the ox." At first glance, it seems like an agricultural detail, but in fact it carries a profound principle of humility and vision. The empty barn may be clean and organized, but it is also lifeless. Abundance comes from effort, from dirt, from continuous labor. True wisdom recognizes that without work, there is no prosperity. This premise teaches us that there is no growth without burden. The ox brings strength, but also requires maintenance, care, and the cleaning of dirt. So it is with life. In order to achieve abundance, we must deal with responsibilities, unforeseen challenges, and discomfort. The fool wants the benefits without the costs. The wise understand that every burden carries within it the opportunity for multiplication. The clean crib symbolizes the illusion of a life without problems, but also without fruit. Many prefer to avoid responsibility to maintain the appearance of order, but end up stagnant. True growth requires facing the complexity of work, daily challenges, and the dirt that inevitably arises in the process. It is in this context that humility becomes essential. Recognizing limits means admitting that we cannot reap without sowing, nor prosper without effort. Humility prevents us from falling into the trap of laziness, disguised as simplicity. It is easy to reject challenges in order to avoid inconvenience, but that never generates abundance. Life demands courage to face what is hard work. The wise know it is worth handling the effort because the harvest will be greater. This truth applies to all areas: relationships, business, ministries, and even spiritual growth. Whoever desires maturity must accept correction, endure pain, and go through the process. The clean barn without oxen may look organized, but it is sterile. The barn full of work marked by effort is fertile. The price of abundance is dealing with the inconvenience of the process. Humility here is recognizing that we do not control everything, but we can choose how much we are willing to dedicate. The proud refuse to carry burdens because they think they deserve ease. The humble accept that work is part of the journey and understand that their strength comes from God. Thus, they do not fear effort, but embrace it as a means of growth and harvest. In the end, the message is clear: better a dirty barn full of life than a clean barn without fruit. True wisdom does not seek only order but abundance. The dirt of the process is a sign that there is movement, growth, and strength at work. Whoever desires to prosper must accept the challenge of handling burdens, recognizing that from them comes the power to generate the future. It is no coincidence that Proverbs 14 emphasizes, "A faithful witness does not lie, but a false witness breathes out lies." This is not only a matter of the courtroom, but also a principle that governs life in society. Lies always distort reality, and though they may stand for a time, they eventually collapse. Faithfulness to truth is the foundation that sustains relationships, businesses, and entire nations. Lies are like a crack in the foundation of a house. At first, it may seem insignificant, but over time, it weakens the whole structure. Truth, however, may be difficult at first, but preserves solidity. Discernment in the face of lies requires maturity to understand that not every easy path is safe. The righteous choose uprightness even when it costs dearly. There is a strategic detail here. The false witness does not only lie, but utters lies. This shows that their mouth becomes a factory of destruction. Twisted words generate division, weaken alliances, and tarnish reputations. Whoever walks this path becomes complicit in injustice. The faithful witness, however, serves as a beacon of light, showing that truth does not need to be invented, it simply exists. Discernment is what separates the naive from the prudent. The naive believe every story, but the wise know how to weigh words and observe actions. Lies, sooner or later, contradict themselves. The wise discern because they do not cling only to what is said, but to the fruit produced by actions. In this way, they are not deceived by appearances, for they understand that truth reveals itself in time. This premise also teaches us about personal responsibility. Being a faithful witness is not only speaking the truth when asked, but living coherently in everything. Whoever embraces this commitment becomes trustworthy. On the other hand, the liar loses credibility and never finds peace. Life becomes a race to sustain disguises, and that is a burden too heavy to carry. Lies are always a short-range weapon. They may generate immediate gains, but soon demand a high price. They destroy friendships, separate families, and corrode societies. Truth, however, may delay results, but produces fruits that remain. Faithfulness to truth creates deep roots that sustain trust. Deception, no matter how sophisticated, has no future. Therefore, discerning lies is more than a skill. It is a lifestyle. Every day, we are called to be faithful witnesses, guardians of truth amid the chaos of falsehood. Whoever chooses this path may not receive immediate applause, but will have honor before God and firmness before men. Truth may be demanding, but it is always liberating. It is interesting to note how the Bible says, "The scoffer seeks wisdom and finds it not, but knowledge is easy to him that understands." This statement reveals that it is not merely external effort that guarantees understanding, but the inner disposition of the heart. The scoffer may even seek knowledge, but arrogance closes the doors. The prudent, humble, and receptive easily grasp the essence of wisdom. Seeking understanding is not only about reading books or hearing advice. It is aligning the heart to receive truth. Many study much and yet remain blind because they seek only confirmation of their own ideas. Wisdom does not reveal itself to those who only want to validate their vanity, but to those who open themselves to truly learn. It is, at this point, that the prudent easily find what the proud never access. The scoffer represents the type of person who rejects divine principles. They may appear interested in learning, but their intention is to mock, criticize, or scorn. And because of this posture, wisdom hides from them. It is like someone covering their ears during a song and then complaining they cannot hear. The problem is not the lack of sound, but the lack of openness. The prudent, on the other hand, seek understanding with humility. They know they do not have all the answers and therefore absorb lessons anywhere. They learn from teachers, but also from children, from successes and from mistakes. Their heart is fertile ground, and so even a small seed of wisdom germinates and becomes abundant fruit. The key lies in the inner attitude. This premise also shows us the difference between information and transformation. The scoffer may accumulate data, but their life does not change because they do not allow themselves to be shaped. The prudent, even receiving little, turn that little into much because they apply what they learn. Wisdom is not only about acquiring, but about living according to what was received. The heart that seeks understanding becomes a source of discernment for others. Such people not only learn but also inspire. They carry a teachable spirit that attracts opportunities, healthy relationships, and spiritual revelations. The scoffer, closed in their own arrogance, drives people away and wastes opportunities, remaining trapped in a cycle of barrenness. Therefore, the lesson is clear. The search for understanding begins in the heart. It is not about extraordinary intelligence, but about humility to listen, willingness to apply, and courage to change. The prudent easily find because they are open. The scoffer never finds because they are blinded by their own pride. The heart decides whether wisdom will be received or rejected. Few verses are as revealing as this one. The heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not share its joy. Here we find a profound portrait of the inner life. Every human being carries pains and joys that no one else can fully measure. Wisdom lies in recognizing this reality. Not everyone will understand our struggle or our celebration. There are experiences that are intimate, kept only between us and God. This principle reminds us that the inner life is sacred territory. Many try to measure happiness or sadness by appearances, but the biblical text shows that each heart carries its own universe. Bitterness is felt in silence, even when surrounded by crowds. Joy, even when shared, is never fully understood by others. This invites us to compassion, not judging the pain of others. The wisdom here is learning to deal with emotional solitude. Not always will there be someone capable of understanding the depth of what we feel. Spiritual maturity consists of finding refuge in God when no one else understands. The heart may be silently wounded, but before Him it finds comfort. And when joy overflows, He is the only one who fully understands it. This premise also protects us from comparisons. We cannot measure another's life by appearances of happiness or success. Each person has invisible battles and hidden victories. Therefore, the wise are not deceived by facades. They understand that life is more complex than public smiles or hidden tears. Discernment is seeing beyond the surface. At the same time, the text teaches us not to depend on external approval to validate our emotions. True joy does not need applause to be real, just as pain does not need everyone's understanding to be legitimate. This awareness brings freedom. It makes us less dependent on others' opinions and more connected to the truth of our heart before God. Inner balance is born when we accept that we will not always be understood. This acceptance brings peace. To stop demanding that everyone grasp our joys and sorrows is an act of maturity. Thus we preserve energy, cultivate resilience, and learn to find satisfaction in living authentically, without masks. Finally, this lesson calls us to two practices: to care for our own soul and to respect the journey of others. Each heart knows its pain and its joy. Only God penetrates these territories completely. That is why we must approach Him as our supreme confidant. And in relation to others, we must offer less judgment and more empathy. This is the balance that creates healthy relationships and a full life. When the text declares, "The house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish," it reveals a striking contrast. Apparently, a house is stronger and more imposing than a simple tent. However, Proverbs shows that it is not the external appearance that defines the future, but the spiritual foundation. The house without justice may be luxurious, but it is doomed to ruin. The tent of the righteous may be humble, but it is destined for prosperity. This teaching breaks social paradigms. Many believe that stability comes from material greatness, but biblical wisdom teaches that true prosperity is born of righteousness. The wicked may have resources, influence, and status, but all of that is fragile if not sustained by truth. The righteous, even with little, possess a foundation that resists time and the winds of life. The destroyed house is a symbol of false security. How many build empires on corruption and deceit, believing they will last forever? Yet sooner or later, those rotten foundations crumble. The tent that flourishes shows that it does not matter the size of the structure, but the blessing that sustains it. When God is the foundation, even simplicity flourishes. This premise also exposes a spiritual truth. Destiny is not defined by what the eyes see, but by what is invisible. The righteous flourish because they live in covenant with eternal principles. Their prosperity does not depend solely on external conditions, but on an inner strength that generates life where there seems to be nothing. The wicked, trapped in appearances, reap the inevitable destruction of their own choices. The contrast between house and tent also teaches us about humility. Often it is better to live in simplicity with peace than in luxury with torment. The righteous may dwell in a fragile space, but their life flourishes because it is rooted in truth. The wicked, even surrounded by high walls, carry within them the fragility of lies and injustice. This proverb is a call to reflection. What are we building? A house of appearances that will be destroyed, or a tent of righteousness that will flourish? The world values grand structures, but God values solid foundations. This perspective redefines the concept of success. It is not about visible greatness, but about invisible firmness. Therefore, the contrast between houses and destinies leads us to choose what truly matters. The righteous prefer to flourish in simplicity than to collapse in ostentation. This is the great reversal of wisdom. What the world despises, God exalts. And what the world exalts, God shows as fragile. In the end, what remains is not the luxury of the house, but the life that flourishes in the tent of the upright. One of the best-known verses of this chapter states, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." Here we see a timeless warning. Not everything that seems right really leads to life. Appearances can deceive, and blind confidence in our own understanding can lead us to destruction. Biblical wisdom calls us to look beyond illusions to discern truth. The illusory path is seductive because it presents itself as a shortcut. It seems easier, faster, and even more pleasant. But its foundation is deceptive, built on immediate desires and passing emotions. Whoever trusts only in their own perception risks investing years in a destiny that in the end turns out to be a dead end. Death here is not only physical, but also spiritual and emotional. This principle exposes the limitation of human vision. We see only part of the road, but not its end. Man judges by what seems good at the moment, while God sees the outcome of every choice. That is why the Bible insists on teaching us to depend on the Lord's direction. He alone can reveal whether the path that seems right today is, in fact, the route to perdition. The seduction of the illusory path also shows how easily we are deceived by passions. Many believe they are living in freedom, when in fact they are building prisons. Sin disguises itself as pleasure, injustice paints itself as advantage, and foolishness dresses itself as wisdom. But like every disguise, sooner or later it falls, revealing the emptiness that was hidden. The wise, in contrast, do not trust only in their own vision. They seek counsel, compare paths with the Word, and remain in prayer. This does not make them exempt from challenges, but it protects them from fatal illusions. Their route is safer because it is founded on eternal principles, not on fleeting appearances. They understand that not all that glitters is gold, and not every shortcut is a blessing. This premise also brings a practical call. We need to evaluate our decisions constantly. In relationships, finances, career choices, and even spiritual matters, it is easy to fall into the trap of what seems good. Discernment only comes when we submit our paths to God. He, as a loving Father, corrects routes before it is too late. In the end, the great lesson is clear. Trusting only in our own vision is dangerous. The road of self-sufficiency may be attractive, but it leads to death. The path guided by divine wisdom may seem narrower, but it always leads to life. The challenge is to have the courage to abandon illusions in order to follow the route of truth. That is the difference between perishing in appearances or flourishing in eternity. Not everything that shines is gold, and not every laugh is a sign of true joy. Proverbs 14 states, "Even in laughter the heart may ache, and the end of joy may be grief." This verse exposes the fragility of human emotions. Many times, smiles hide deep anguish, and celebrations mask wounds that have not yet healed. The text invites us to look beyond appearances and discern inner reality. Deceptive laughter shows that visible happiness does not always correspond to the state of the soul. How many appear to be well yet carry silent battles within? This lesson teaches us not to judge others' lives superficially, nor envy those who seem to have everything resolved. Behind laughter, there may be loneliness, emptiness, and unspoken pain. The end of joy turning into sadness also warns us about the fragility of fleeting pleasures. The world offers temporary amusements that appear to satisfy, but soon leave a bitter aftertaste. The laughter of empty entertainment does not last long. True joy, which comes from God, remains even in difficult times. The difference lies in the source that feeds the heart. This premise calls us to personal reflection. How often do we wear masks of joy to avoid revealing our pain? The problem is not smiling amid struggles, but hiding the soul in illusions. The wise understand that healing does not come from disguising, but from confronting. True freedom is being able to laugh genuinely without needing to hide tears behind the smile. Wisdom also teaches us to offer empathy. When we see someone laughing, we should not presume everything is well. The human heart is too deep to be read by surface appearances. Therefore, we must cultivate spiritual sensitivity to perceive beyond the obvious and offer support to those who, even while smiling, cry out silently for help. This verse is also a warning against the relentless pursuit of pleasures as a way to numb pain. Many try to escape anguish by diving into parties, addictions, or superficial relationships. The result is always the same: laughter that fades, leaving sadness even more intense. Only the joy of the Lord is a source that never dries up. Thus, deceptive laughter challenges us to seek authenticity. Better a simple but genuine smile than loud laughter that hides emptiness. Wisdom does not deny pain, but transforms life so that even amid tears we may have peace. Passing laughter may deceive, but joy rooted in God endures forever. Every choice carries with it an inevitable outcome. Proverbs 14 reminds us, "The faithless will be fully repaid for their ways, and the good rewarded for theirs." This principle shows that no one escapes reaping what they sow. The unfaithful who persist in disobedience end up suffocated by their own choices. The righteous, in contrast, find genuine satisfaction in the fruit of the good they practice. The weight of consequences is like a spiritual law. Just as gravity acts regardless of our will, the harvest of actions is also inevitable. Each daily decision builds tomorrow, and that is why the biblical text warns, "The unfaithful may think they are winning, but soon they will be crushed by the outcome of their deeds. The good, however, reap joy, because they sow correctly." This proverb also reveals that satisfaction is not only in material results, but in a clear conscience. The good rejoice not only in what they receive, but in the process of having walked uprightly. Their reward is not just the fruit, but the peace of having lived in truth. The unfaithful, in contrast, find themselves trapped in a cycle of emptiness, even when they achieve something externally. Life is a mirror that reflects back what we give to it. Whoever sows disloyalty reaps distrust. Whoever cultivates injustice reaps ruin. Whoever sows love reaps honor. This is divine justice manifested in practical form. Foolishness believes it can escape this principle, but sooner or later, the bill comes due. The weight of consequences is unavoidable. This lesson also teaches us the importance of responsibility. Many blame fate, others, or even God for the results they experience, but forget to examine their own steps. The wise understand that each choice is a seed, and therefore they are careful with what they sow. They know that tomorrow's joy depends on today's faithfulness. The weight of consequences can also be liberating. If we reap what we sow, this means we can change the future by changing our seeds. The past cannot be altered, but the present is an opportunity to reorient paths. The good person is not perfect, but is one who decides to align their actions with truth and thus finds joy in their works. In the end, this premise confronts us with a decisive question. What fruits do we want to reap? The unfaithful will reap burden and emptiness. The righteous will reap peace and satisfaction. The weight of consequences should not be feared, but understood as an invitation to responsibility. Whoever sows with wisdom does not fear tomorrow, because they know the harvest will be good. Life is full of voices, but wisdom lies in discerning which ones to follow. Proverbs 14 says, "The simple believe every word, but the prudent give thought to their steps." Here we have a warning against naivety and an invitation to prudence. It's not about distrusting everything, but about learning to listen with a filter, weighing information before acting. The simple are carried by every wind. The wise observe the path before stepping. Listening to others is an art that requires balance. Some never listen to anyone, falling into the pride of self-sufficiency, while others listen to everyone, becoming prisoners of opinions. The biblical text shows that the secret is not closing the ears, but using discernment. Knowing how to listen attentively and then reflect with wisdom is what distinguishes the prudent from the naive. Naivety causes many to fall into traps. Believing every word is opening the door to deceit, manipulation, and disappointment. Prudence, in contrast, does not reject listening but filters it. The prudent analyze, confront with principles, and observe fruits before making decisions. This posture protects them from rash choices and painful consequences. This premise also teaches us to value the right counsel. Listening to experienced, wise, and God-fearing people is a source of protection. However, listening to those who only speak carelessly can be disastrous. That is why we must develop spiritual sensitivity to discern who speaks with self-interest and who speaks with truth. Listening with prudence also means learning from others' mistakes. Not always do we need to experience pain to know it hurts. The wise hear stories, observe paths, and extract lessons. The simple, by not listening attentively, repeat already known mistakes. This difference shows that wisdom lies in transforming external experiences into internal learning. This verse also alerts us to the power of influence. We are all shaped by the voices we choose to hear. Whoever constantly exposes themselves to negative, deceitful, or superficial words will inevitably be shaped by them. Whoever surrounds themselves with truths, upright counsel, and divine principles will have their steps established. Listening is more dangerous and powerful than it seems. In the end, the importance of listening to others lies in choosing well who we allow to speak into our lives. We must not be closed off, but neither can we be naive. Prudence is the filter that separates wheat from chaff. The simple believe everything and fall. The prudent listen, weigh, and walk securely. The invitation of Proverbs is clear. Do not close your ears, but learn to listen with wisdom. Among the greatest hidden treasures of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Proverbs 14 declares, "In the fear of the Lord there is strong confidence, and his children will have a place of refuge." Unlike paralyzing fear, this fear is reverence, respect, and awareness of God's greatness. It is an inner posture that places us in the right position, dependent on the Creator. And from that dependence arises true freedom and security. The fear of the Lord leads to life because it keeps us from dangerous shortcuts. Those who fear God do not act carelessly, do not play with principles, and do not compromise values for convenience. This reverence creates an invisible line of protection around a person. Their steps are not guided only by emotions, but by convictions that withstand external pressure. The strong confidence mentioned in this verse reveals that fear produces security. Those who walk with God do not need to fear tomorrow because they know they are guarded. This confidence does not mean the absence of struggles, but the certainty that they will not face them alone. Life, when grounded in the fear of the Lord, becomes stable even amid storms. Fear is also portrayed as a refuge for children. This shows that the life of those who fear God overflows in protection for future generations. Sons, grandsons, and disciples reap the fruits of the faithfulness of someone who chose to live in reverence. Fear is not only a personal experience, but a legacy that multiplies. This principle challenges us to reflect. In whom or in what are we trusting? Many seek security in wealth, power, or relationships, but all these pillars can collapse. The fear of the Lord, on the other hand, remains unshakable. It guarantees that even in unstable scenarios, there will be inner peace and clear direction. The contrast is evident. Without fear, life becomes vulnerable, unstable, and exposed. With fear, there is firmness, refuge, and direction. This truth shows us that real wisdom does not lie in trusting our own strength, but in submitting to the greatness of God. It is the humility of recognizing human limits and trusting in a limitless God. Finally, this premise reminds us that the fear of the Lord is not a burden, but a key to liberation. It opens doors of understanding, preserves from foolishness, and leads to a full life. Fear does not imprison. On the contrary, it guards, protects, and generates confidence. In this reverent fear, we find the secret to living with purpose, balance, and lasting peace. History shows, and Proverbs confirms, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Here we do not see only a spiritual principle, but also a political and social truth. No people remain standing solely by military strength or economic wealth. The foundation that sustains a nation enduringly is righteousness. When it is abandoned, sin becomes an unbearable burden. Justice is like a foundation that gives firmness to the structures of society. When laws are applied fairly, when rulers exercise authority with integrity, and when citizens respect moral principles, the nation flourishes. The opposite of this is corruption, which corrodes silently and weakens what seemed unshakable. Where justice is lacking, sin multiplies. This verse also shows that the prosperity of a people is not only in their external power, but in their internal moral health. Many powerful civilizations collapsed because they traded justice for corruption, truth for lies, and morality for unrestrained pleasure. Shame becomes inevitable when justice is abandoned. At the same time, the text brings hope. When righteousness prevails, even a small people can be exalted. It is not about territorial greatness or economic influence, but about recognition that comes from integrity. A just nation inspires trust, attracts respect, and becomes a reference for others. The secret of exaltation lies in commitment to what is right. This lesson also applies on a personal scale. Just as a nation is exalted by righteousness, an individual life is also honored when founded on correct principles. Injustice may bring immediate advantages, but it brings shame in the future. Justice may seem slower, but it always produces fruits that endure. Sin, described as reproach, does not affect only the one who practices it, but the whole community. Corrupt leaders stain the name of a country. Dishonest families weaken society. Communities that tolerate injustice bear deep scars. Biblical wisdom is clear. Injustice always brings reproach, while righteousness always brings honor. Finally, this premise calls us to take responsibility. It is not enough to expect others to practice justice. We must begin with our own actions. A just nation is formed by upright citizens. The exaltation of a people is born from the sum of small right choices. Thus, Proverbs 14 reminds us, righteousness is not only a virtue, it is destiny. It lifts up or tears down entire civilizations. Proverbs 14 closes with a powerful truth. A wise servant has the king's favor, but one who acts shamefully incurs his wrath. Here we see the difference between those who live with discernment and those who act foolishly. Prudence attracts favor, while recklessness awakens discipline. The text shows that we are not walking alone. Our choices draw the attention of heaven. Being a wise servant is living consciously, evaluating each step, and choosing integrity even when no one is watching. This posture not only preserves, but also attracts the favor of God. Favor here is not luck or chance, but supernatural grace that opens doors, protects, and elevates. Those who walk in wisdom become the target of this benevolent gaze. The opposite, however, is inevitable. Those who bring shame, who persist in foolishness, will reap wrath. This wrath is not only God's reaction, but also the natural consequences of recklessness. Shame attracts judgment because it exposes the fragility of a life without principles. It is like sowing wind and reaping storm. Sooner or later, the result comes. This premise reminds us that prudence is more than caution. It is spiritual vision. The wise servant does not act out of fear, but out of respect for divine principles. They do not seek merely to avoid problems, but to live in a way that honors the Lord in every area. This is the wisdom that produces peace, respect, and true prosperity. The grace upon the prudent also overflows to those around them. A wise servant blesses their family, inspires their colleagues, and strengthens their community. Their prudence becomes a living testimony, attracting trust and revealing that wisdom always rewards. The fool, in reaping wrath, harms not only themselves, but also all who are connected to them. This verse therefore reveals a spiritual law. Prudence attracts favor. Foolishness attracts judgment. There is no neutrality. Each choice moves us toward recognition or shame, toward grace or wrath. And wisdom calls us to decide which side we want to be on. The prudent build, the foolish destroy. Thus the chapter ends by showing that prudence is not detail, but destiny. The wise servant will be remembered for their uprightness and reaped by the grace of God. The foolish will be marked by shame and consumed by the weight of their own choices. The decision is clear. To live wisely is to attract the favor of the King of Kings. And there is no greater blessing than this. At the end of this chapter, it becomes impossible to ignore the force of the contrasts it presents. Proverbs 14 is not a text to be read in haste, but one to be meditated upon as if observing a survival map. It shows that life can be built or torn down by our choices, and that the difference between the wise and the fool lies less in intellectual capacity and more in the posture of the heart. Each verse gives us both a warning and a promise. The warning against foolishness, which destroys families, corrupts nations, and leads people to irreparable ruin. The promise of wisdom, which builds solid destinies, produces lasting fruits, and attracts the favor of God Himself. The contrast is not merely poetic, it is real, and Scripture insists on reminding us so that we are not deceived by appearances. The chapter also reveals that true life is not measured by what is visible. Luxurious houses may be fragile, while humble tents may flourish. Laughter may hide tears, and joys may turn into pain. Wisdom calls us to look beyond the superficial and see what really sustains existence: integrity, fear of the Lord, and justice. Proverbs 14 also teaches us that every choice is a seed. The unfaithful drown in their own ways, but the righteous rejoice in their works. Lies may sustain a narrative for a time, but eventually collapse. Truth, even if costly, remains unshakable. This is the spiritual law that governs life. We reap what we sow. Reflecting on this chapter, it becomes clear that it is not enough to admire wisdom. We must apply it. The prudent guard their lips, weigh their steps, measure the words they hear, and walk in the fear of the Lord. It is this daily practice that protects them from deception and places them in a position to flourish. Even when circumstances seem adverse, the text also shows us that our choices affect not only ourselves, but those around us. Righteousness exalts a nation while sin brings it shame. The fear of the Lord becomes a refuge for children. The prudence of the servant attracts grace, while foolishness produces shame. Every personal decision multiplies into collective effects, either for building or for ruin. Finally, Proverbs 14 leaves us with a practical decision. Which path will we choose? The way of wisdom, which builds, protects, and flourishes, or the way of foolishness, which destroys, deceives, and leads to death? The answer is not theoretical. It is lived out in every word, every step, every choice. May the fear of the Lord be our compass and justice our foundation, so that we may reap not shame, but honor, not ruin, but life.